Hello, I'm Eleanor Toye from the University of Cambridge Judge Business School. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a case study that we've done at a civil engineering firm, which has some parallels with BT, which I think may be of interest. So the three parallels that we've picked up on are, first of all, that this company has been through and is still going through a major digital transformation. It's also a company that builds critical national infrastructure, very well established, with a long-standing legacy of civil engineering in this country, and it's having to make these very big changes to grapple with digital technology and the associated risks and how they go about governing AI in particular. This company was founded in the 19th century. It's a public limited company and it's regularly involved in national critical infrastructure projects, which is one of its core competencies. But it's had to make really big changes in the way that it deals with that. So competitive pressures have meant that it hasn't been able to simply just go and build big things like it used to do. Instead, it now has to make digital technology a really key part of its offering. It's at the front and center of its branding. It's also really making a digital offering critical to everything to do with the way that it works. This has brought lots of big challenges, cultural change, restructuring of the company's business. They've really had to think very hard about how they communicate these changes to the workforce. They've had to retrain and redeploy people and really kind of help everybody get into the new mindset. So to give you an understanding of their previous business model, they used to build supermarkets and other kind of large scale projects, but they would build them and walk away. They had a traditional engineering skill base, but it was becoming very low margin, and the clients were driving this very commoditized kind of approach, which meant that the profits were really just starting to disappear and they had got nothing left to reinvest. So they made a decision that they needed to make a complete change in the way that they operated their business because it was just becoming unsustainable. So in their old business model, they had about 2,000 clients. Their focus was on delivering a physical asset. They would build it and walk away. Their business plan only looked ahead for about 2 years, but they did have this core competence in delivering critical national infrastructure projects. So they decided that they should retain that. They needed to build on that core competence, but they needed to do it in a completely different way. I think the straw that broke the camel's back for them was when a supermarket who they'd been building for many years came to them and said, well, thanks very much for your latest proposal. We'd like you to make that 30% cheaper. And they said, no, thank you very much. We just don't think we can do that any longer. And in fact, they went through their whole client list. So they didn't only drop this particular supermarket client, but they went from having around 2,000 clients. They pared it down to just about 40. And their aim was to focus on helping those clients in the long term to improve their business. And doing things digitally was a really huge part of that. They describe themselves as helping clients to join the digital dots and work towards creating an enterprise digital twin, which we'll talk about more later, but they really envisage that as a sort of digital model ultimately of the client's entire organization. And so because they're building this long-term consultancy relationship, their business plan now looks ahead 10 to 15 years. So they're thinking in really quite a different way about how they go about helping their clients. So new strategic goals, they've shifted focus from the physical asset to a long-term digital and consulting service. They aim to bring digital technology into all the services that they deploy for clients. But they're also going through this big internal change where they're digitizing their own company's entire processes and culture. In order to achieve that, they have a new chief digital officer who has a seat on the board, and he acts as a kind of champion for change. And he's very clear that this big cultural shift is actually, he uses the word traumatic to describe the impact on the organization. It's really been a very big thing, and so a large part of his role is listening to people's concerns and really selling to them the new business model and showing them what the advantages of it are going to be. So there are two kind of prongs to the way that they're going about driving this change, and the first of them is an AI-enabled program management system that they've developed in-house, which they're calling Daisy. This helps with decision making in project management. Users are able to input high-level contract information and explore different scenarios, so they can see what the impact of making different decisions would be on the project outcomes, and it helps them to decide what they should do. This was actually developed in-house by just one person within the firm who was very interested in AI and started out trying out tools like TensorFlow and PyTorch, but found them very difficult to use and could see that although he personally was very good at understanding all the maths involved, he thought that some of the engineers were really going to struggle with this and find it difficult. And he just felt that it was too big an overhead. People were going to have to spend too much time learning how to use the tools and wouldn't then have time to do that in order to do anything useful. So he wanted to develop an application that he could give to engineers throughout the company and say, look, it works like this. 3 clicks, you can load all your data, engineer features, and train your customized model, and then you're going to get results quite quickly. So he has done that over the course of about 4 years, and it's now being quite widely used within the company. And they also advertise it on their website, and it's been very, very successful. It does, however, bring some new challenges. Obviously, because it's machine learning, there can be unpredictable emergent errors. And one way that the company has dealt with this is by building in some hard limits just to prevent the system from working on anything at all that's safety critical. It does a keyword scan, and if there are any words in there that indicate that this thing or this component or project might be a safety related issue, then the computer says no, it just won't do it. Equally, they refuse to work on any kind of classification problems because they're aware that that's an area where bias can creep in various ways, and they'd just rather not take that risk. And yeah, they have a limit on the data values that the system will accept. So anything that's beyond 2 standard deviations of the mean, it just says, nope, sorry, that's out of scope, don't recognize that, don't want to deal with it, too weird, so it just won't work. So that makes their use of it really very conservative in a lot of ways. They do have problems that this approach doesn't fix. The most obvious one is what they call the magic missing column of data, which is that having developed some sort of model which seems to be working pretty well, they can find that it occasionally just goes crazy and produces results that don't mean anything. And this is usually because they've omitted some important factor from the model. There's something or other that they haven't thought about and haven't included, and it's not there. And when that thing happens in real life, it screws everything up. So there's no kind of formal solution to this problem, really. You just have to keep exploring scenarios and thinking about all the things that you might have to include and try to make sure that you've covered all the bases, but it's quite likely that there's going to be some aspect of the real world that you haven't thought about and haven't included in your model. So that remains a continuing challenge for them. Okay, so the other thing that the company is very much engaged in, which is part of their digital vision, is digital twin. Now, for them, this means essentially providing a joined up digital model of a physical asset. So maybe a water treatment plant or electricity generation, could be a smart motorway, anything that they build. They want to have a kind of digital model that you can look at and see how it works and what's going on. And initially, this is fairly simple, actually. It's just a matter of connecting existing component control systems together. So there are control systems already for much of this critical national infrastructure, and it just means joining it up so that you can get bigger insights from looking at the whole of the data altogether. And this is obviously very helpful for risk management because you can spot patterns and issues which you wouldn't have been able to see if you were only looking at each of the components separately. When they're developing one of these digital twins, they'll typically start with a small scale proof of concept just to see how it could work, and then they will scale it up once they've understood the nature of the problem and the client is clear about what they're trying to achieve with it. They will then scale it up to a bigger kind of project. At the moment, this doesn't really involve any AI, although it could eventually do. But they are very ambitious for this, and they do hope eventually to simulate the client's entire organization, not just particular physical assets within it. So they feel it's got a lot of scope for the future. It does raise certain issues to do with trust and security. Cybersecurity is a really high priority for them. They're very aware of the possibly very severe consequences if critical national infrastructure gets hacked. And of course, that's more and more possible. The more you join everything up, the more possibility that some part of the system, which is connected to everything else, is on the internet and somebody manages to get in through the back door. This didn't really used to be an issue in the past when everything was isolated from the internet, but that's no longer really the case. So that's something that does give them sleepless nights, and which they're working on, thinking about how to secure that. They're also very involved with developing legal and regulatory frameworks and standards that they consider are needed to build trust and allow safe data sharing. So they take a very positive view of regulation, but feel that it's really important that they get involved because they think sometimes that the regulators don't quite understand what's needed or are a bit too divorced from what's going on the ground, and that they really need to have input in order to make sure that the structures that are put in place accurately reflect the reality of the situation. So in addition to those, if you like, technical or practical things that they're doing, they're finding that within their organization, they've got some significant cultural barriers to these changes that they want to make. First of all, with the clients, you see there in the bottom right hand corner, lack of digital maturity can be a problem for some clients. They often see naive enthusiasm from clients who are desperate to get a digital twin because they know it's the thing that you need and everybody else has got, but they're not really quite sure what one is or why they need it or what to do with it. And so the company, the engineering company, will go in there and ask a lot of questions and just try to tease out from the client what their real needs are and how it is that in fact digital twin or AI may be appropriate to help them, or perhaps that they aren't. Really just trying to kind of get an understanding of the client's business environment and see where these tools are likely to be helpful. So they've got quite a good handle on how to deal with that, but they're also facing challenges internally. Interestingly, several of our interviewees mentioned that the leadership could be an issue. They mentioned that people on the board are often in post only for 2 to 3 years. They may not be technically trained or aware of issues around AI. So they may be very risk averse, or alternatively, they may be over enthusiastic, but without really understanding what it is that they're selling when they talk to people about AI. So all those things really need to be tackled at the top level. The engineers themselves, who are, you know, the backbone of the company, have many strengths and are there to kind of drive this vision forward, but they have had some teething troubles, let's say, communicating to the engineers what the DAISY tool is all about and how to use it. And a lot of this comes from the very reasonable natural skepticism of the engineers who want to understand exactly how something works before they're prepared to use it, and don't want to just say, you know, just take it on trust and go, okay, I press the buttons and it all works. They want to be able to check. They want to know for certain exactly what it's doing and why it's doing it, and they want to be able to check that the results are correct. And while that's fine and correct that they do that, it also raises a problem because often they don't have the time to go into looking at how the AI tool works and understand it from first principles. And so that may in fact lead quite a lot of them simply to reject it and say, well, I can't use that because I haven't got time to understand it properly. So that's something that the firm has had to try to overcome, try to find ways to educate the engineers and help them to learn how to use this thing in a way that they're comfortable with and that they can trust. Likewise, commercial staff have been quite anxious about the introduction of AI because they can be quite anxious about it, and not being technically trained, their worries about it may be quite divorced from the reality. And so it's been important to try to help them to understand what the issues might be and where they need to, take action to mitigate risk, and where they can simply relax and assume it's going to be fine. So in order to deal with these various issues, the company has come up with an internal communication strategy. Some of that is actually quite technical. It's just making efforts to improve the explainability of the results of the AI that they're using, make sure that everybody can understand it. And they've also been devising programs to communicate to staff. So they have an innovation training program for staff. Innovation isn't something that they've been particularly strong at in the past because it wasn't really, a major part of their approach on their previous business model. They were just, doing something fairly standard, but now they're doing something much more innovative, and people need to get comfortable with that and understand what's involved and know how they can pursue that in a responsible way. So they've got a training program to do that. They've also developed documents specifically explaining the AI tools, pitched to different groups of staff at different levels, depending on what the needs are for those particular people. So the documents to help the engineers are clearly much more detailed than the ones that are aimed at the commercial staff, but everybody needs to understand it at the level that's relevant to their job. As well as these quite sort of, I don't know, practical kinds of explanation, I suppose, they've also are, of course, keen to inspire people and help them to feel included in the digital vision, feel that it's going to make their lives easier, that it's not just something that's coming down from on high that they have to put up with, but that it's something that they can buy into and that is maybe going to make their job more interesting or easier. And they need to, I think, be able to get behind it as something positive that their company has to offer the world as well. So there are various early success stories that they can talk about, which mean that that can persuade people that it's worthwhile to pursue the idea of a digital twin, or to use the DAISY tool to help people plan their projects. And they've got a couple of projects that they're very pleased with. One involving digital twin, which they will talk about at length, and that has really helped to sell the ideas that they're trying to put forward into the company itself. So just coming back to where we started, this case study gives us some ideas about the progress of digital transformation in a company that builds critical national infrastructure, and some of the issues that they've had to grapple with in the process of doing that. As I said before, well-established company with legacy engineering culture, very similar to BT in that respect, and grappling with digital technology and associated risk and governance. So thanks very much for watching this. You may well have thoughts or questions about what I've been talking about. We would love to hear from you. Really interested to know what your thoughts are on how this compares to what's going on at BT at the moment. So do please get in touch, either with me, with Philip Stiles, or with Pradeep Debata, and our email addresses are there on the screen for you. Thank you very much.